July 19, 1989. 3:16 p.m. 37,000 feet above Iowa. Dennis Fitch's coffee exploded across his lap. The DC-10 training instructor didn't need to look out the window to know an engine had failed. 18 years flying told him that much. No big deal. DC-10s flew fine on 2 engines. He'd taught that scenario dozens of times. Then flight attendant Donna McGrady rushed past his first-class seat, moving too fast. Her face set off every alarm in his people radar. Fitch caught her sleeve. "Hey, don't worry. This thing flies fine on 2 engines." McGrady leaned close so nearby passengers wouldn't hear. "The captain says we've lost all our hydraulics." Fitch stared at her. "That's impossible. That's what we're being told." 44 minutes later, Dennis Fitch would be kneeling on the cockpit floor, manipulating throttles with both hands, attempting to fly an aircraft that aviation engineers had calculated should never be flyable. McDonnell Douglas would later put their best pilots in simulators to recreate what happened. Not one would successfully land. The National Transportation Safety Board would conclude that a survivable landing was virtually impossible and a highly random event. But on July 9, 1989, 4 men in a cockpit over Iowa would prove them all wrong. This is the story of the impossible landing. The problem started 18 years earlier. General Electric's aircraft engine facility in Evendale, Ohio. A 6,000-pound titanium billet arrived, destined to become 8-stage 1-fan discs for CF6 turbofan engines. Titanium reacts violently with air when melted. A single oxygen or nitrogen molecule creates impurities that can initiate fatigue cracks decades later. To prevent this, GE used double vacuum arc remelting, melting the titanium twice under vacuum conditions. But during the second melt of this particular billet, something went wrong. A leak. Microscopic. Brief. Just enough for a single nitrogen molecule to infiltrate the molten titanium before the vacuum seal restored. That molecule reacted with the surrounding metal, creating what metallurgists call a hard alpha inclusion, a zone where the titanium became brittle. The contaminated section cooled, solidified, looked normal. The billet was tested using ultrasound to detect internal defects. According to NTSB records, one of the 8 fan discs forged from this titanium was rejected for an unsatisfactory ultrasonic indication. That disc was sent to an outside laboratory. That disc was returned to General Electric. That disc, according to proper procedure, should have been scrapped. But the records were contradictory. 2 different discs bearing the same serial number appeared in GE's manufacturing records. Somewhere in the paper trail between suppliers and General Electric, a disc that should have been destroyed made its way into production. The contaminated section was machined into the bore of a stage 1 fan disc. During machining, the brittle titanium around the nitrogen inclusion cracked and fell out, leaving a cavity approximately 1/4 inch deep with microscopic cracks radiating from its edges. That disc was installed in a CF6 turbofan engine. That engine was mounted in the tail of a McDonnell Douglas DC-10. That aircraft was registered as N1819U. That aircraft was delivered new to United Airlines in 1971. For the next 18 years, that microscopic crack grew. Every time the engine powered up, the fan disk heated from room temperature to several hundred degrees. The metal expanded. The crack opened infinitesimally. When the engine shut down, the crack closed. But not quite all the way. Each thermal cycle advanced the crack front by millionths of an inch. 16,997 flight cycles. 43,401 hours of engine operation. By July 19, 1989, the crack had propagated for 18 years and reached approximately half an inch in length. That morning, N1819U was scheduled for United Airlines Flight 232 from Denver to Chicago, continuing to Philadelphia. 3 General Electric CF6 engines, 1 under each wing, 1 mounted in the tail. The tail-mounted engine was designated engine number 2. The stage 1 fan disk in engine number 2 was the contaminated component from 1971. At 2:09 p.m. Central Daylight Time, Flight 232 departed Denver with 285 passengers and 11 crew members aboard. Captain Alfred Haynes, 57 years old, occupied the left seat. 33 years with United, 29,000 hours of flight experience, former Marine Corps pilot. First Officer William Records sat in the right seat. Flight engineer Dudley Dvorak monitored systems. The flight was unremarkable for 67 minutes. At 3:16 p.m. and 10 seconds, at 37,000 feet, during a shallow right turn over Alta, Iowa, the 18-year-old crack reached its critical length. The crack propagated catastrophically through the remaining titanium. The Stage 1 fan disk, weighing 380 pounds and rotating at 3,200 revolutions per minute, disintegrated. The explosion was uncontained. Titanium fragments ejected from the engine, cowling at supersonic velocities in a spray pattern exceeding 90 degrees from the engine centerline. Shrapnel penetrated the right horizontal stabilizer, severed the number 1 hydraulic line, severed the number 2 hydraulic line, severed the number 3 hydraulic line. All 3 hydraulic systems, routing through a common 4-inch corridor in the tail section, were catastrophically breached. Hydraulic fluid, pressurized to 3,000 pounds per square inch, drained from all 3 systems in seconds. In the cockpit, 3 hydraulic pressure gauges dropped to 0. This was not supposed to be possible. The McDonnell Douglas DC-10 incorporated 3 completely independent hydraulic systems. System 1, powered by the left engine. System 2, powered by the tail engine. System 3, powered by the right engine. The design philosophy was redundancy. Losing one system was a serious emergency. Losing 2 systems simultaneously was a once-in-a-career catastrophic event. Losing all 3 was considered so improbable that McDonnell Douglas engineers had calculated the odds at 1 in a billion flight hours. The FAA had certified the DC-10 based on that mathematical impossibility. But mathematical impossibility was now displayed on 3 gauges reading 0. Without hydraulic pressure, the DC-10's flight control surfaces were inoperative. The ailerons, which control roll. The elevators, which control pitch. The rudder, which controls yaw. The spoilers, the flaps, the slats. Every control surface required hydraulic actuators to move. When a pilot turns the control yoke in a DC-10, he's not directly moving the ailerons. He's moving cables that activate valves that direct hydraulic fluid under 3,000 psi to hydraulic actuators that physically move the control surfaces. Without hydraulic fluid, the control yoke becomes decorative. Captain Haynes turned the yoke left. Nothing happened. Turned it right. Nothing. The yoke felt normal. Spring-loaded resistance. Smooth movement. But it controlled nothing. The aircraft was banking right. Records looked at Haynes. Dvorak looked at Haynes. Both waiting for orders. The bank angle increased. 30 degrees. 35 degrees. In approximately 8 seconds, the DC-10 would roll inverted. Haynes' hand moved to the throttle for engine number 1, the left engine. He reduced thrust. The aircraft stopped rolling, slowly leveled. "Okay," Haynes said, his voice steady. "We're going to fly this thing with thrust." Records stared at him. "Captain, we have no hydraulics. We can't. We're going to fly it with thrust," Haynes repeated. What Haynes had just discovered through instinct was a principle of aerodynamics that would take NTSB investigators 6 months to model mathematically. A DC-10's engines are mounted below the wings and below the aircraft's center of gravity. Differential thrust, more power on one engine than the other, creates a yaw moment. That yaw produces a secondary rolling moment. By manipulating the 2 remaining wing engines asymmetrically, it was theoretically possible to induce roll. Theoretically. In practice, the response was delayed, imprecise, and required constant adjustment. The aircraft began oscillating. The DC-10 was experiencing what flight dynamics engineers call a phugoid cycle, a vertical oscillation characteristic of aircraft that have lost control authority. The plane would pitch nose up, climb, lose airspeed, pitch nose down, descend, gain airspeed, pitch nose up again. Each cycle lasted approximately 40 seconds. With each iteration, the aircraft lost roughly 1,500 feet of altitude. At 3:20 p.m., 4 minutes after the engine failure, Haynes contacted Minneapolis Air Route Traffic Control Center and declared an emergency. He requested vectors to the nearest available airport. Air traffic controllers consulted their maps. Sioux Gateway Airport in Sioux City, Iowa, was 62 miles to the northwest. 9,000-foot runway, emergency services. Controllers issued vectors and notified Sioux City to prepare. In the cabin, senior flight attendant Jan Brown heard the captain's voice over the PA system. "We're experiencing difficulty with our hydraulic systems. We're going to attempt an emergency landing at Sioux City. This is going to be the roughest landing you've ever had." Then Haynes added, "It's been a pleasure serving you." Brown had given emergency briefings for 17 years. She'd never given one like this. At 3:29 p.m., Dennis Fitch walked through the first-class cabin door into the cockpit. Haynes looked up. "You a pilot? DC-10 check airman, training instructor, whatever you need. Look out the window. Tell me if the ailerons are moving." Fitch went to the passenger windows, observed the wing, returned to the cockpit. Nothing. No movement at all. "That's what I thought," Haynes said. He gestured to the open floor space between the pilot seats. "Get down there. Take the throttles. I need you to fly this airplane with engine power." Fitch knelt on the cockpit floor. He placed his left hand on the throttle for engine number 1, his right hand on the throttle for engine number 3. For the next 30 minutes, Dennis Fitch would operate 2 throttles simultaneously, making microscopic adjustments every few seconds, while Haynes and Records continued manipulating the useless control yoke on the chance that some residual hydraulic pressure might provide even fractional control surface movement. The aircraft continued its phugoid oscillation, continued its tendency to turn right. Fitch discovered that pushing both throttles forward pitched the nose down. Pulling both throttles back pitched the nose up. Advancing the left throttle and reducing the right throttle tightened the right turn. Advancing the right throttle and reducing the left throttle shallowed the turn. But the aircraft resisted and wanted to snap back into a right turn. Every control input took 5 to 10 seconds to produce an observable effect. Haynes later described it as like trying to steer a car using only the gas pedal, except the gas pedal's response is delayed by 10 seconds and the car constantly wants to turn right. The crew had no training for total hydraulic failure. The DC-10 flight manual contained no procedure for this scenario. McDonnell Douglas had determined that such a failure was statistically impossible, and therefore not worth developing procedures to address. But Fitch had studied Japan Airlines Flight 123. August 12, 1985. Boeing 747, flying from Tokyo to Osaka. Explosive decompression severed all 4 hydraulic systems. The crew attempted to control the aircraft using differential engine thrust. For 32 minutes they fought to reach Osaka. 520 people died, 4 survived. The JOL 123 crew had 32 minutes. Fitch had studied the cockpit voice recording, analyzed their throttle inputs, understood what they tried, and why it hadn't worked. He had 30 minutes. At 3:35 p.m., air traffic control updated Sioux City that Flight 232 was experiencing total hydraulic failure and would attempt a landing using only engine thrust. Fire departments mobilized. Ambulances scrambled. Hospitals prepared for mass casualties. By extraordinary coincidence, the 185th Fighter Wing of the Iowa Air National Guard was conducting its monthly drill. 285 trained Air National Guardsmen, including combat medics and firefighters, were present at Sioux Gateway Airport. By additional coincidence, Sioux City's hospitals were in the middle of a shift change at 4 p.m. The overlap doubled the number of trauma surgeons and emergency physicians available. Flight 232 descended in a series of barely controlled right-hand spiral patterns. The aircraft was losing altitude at roughly 1,500 feet per minute, 5 times the normal descent rate. Fitch fought the phugoid cycle, fought the right turn tendency, fought the delayed response of thrust inputs. At 3:46 p.m., Fitch needed to turn left. The aircraft was approaching Sioux City from the southeast. The airport lay to the northwest. To line up with any runway, Flight 232 needed to make a left turn. For 30 minutes, the aircraft had only turned right. He pushed the right throttle, engine number 3, to maximum thrust. Reduced the left throttle, engine number 1, to near idle. The aircraft resisted. The right turn tendency fought the differential thrust. Fitch held the throttles. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. Slowly, grudgingly, the DC-10's nose yawed left. The aircraft began a shallow left turn. It was the only left turn Flight 232 would make during the entire emergency, and it pointed them directly at Sioux City. Haynes keyed his microphone. "We're lined up on final approach. Which runway do you want us on?" Air Traffic Control replied, "United 232. "Heavy, you're cleared to land on any runway." Haynes laughed. Actually laughed. "You want to be particular and make it a runway, huh?" 300 feet below, 285 passengers were writing goodbye notes to their families. In the cockpit, Haynes was making jokes. That's the kind of pilot you want in an emergency. The aircraft was lined up with runway 22. The runway was 6,600 feet long and had been closed to traffic. It had a large yellow X painted across the approach end, but it was the closest runway to Flight 232's approach path. Air Traffic Control had hoped to direct them to runway 31, a longer, better-maintained runway, but the aircraft couldn't turn left again to reach it. At 3:52 p.m., Haynes made an announcement to the passengers. "We're going to try an emergency landing at Sioux City. My signal will be the word brace, said 3 times. This is going to be the roughest landing you've ever had." Jan Brown gave the emergency briefing. "Brace position. Head on knees, hands behind head. Do not look up." Then she saw the lap children. FAA regulations allowed children under age 2 to fly on parents' laps without separate seats. No restraint, just laps. At the approach speed Flight 232 was maintaining, those children would become projectiles. Brown grabbed the PA microphone again. "Parents with lap children, place your child on the floor between your legs. Hold them down there." Some parents complied. Some refused. Some were too panicked to process the instruction. After the crash, investigators would note that lap children placed on the floor had significantly higher survival rates than those held in parents' arms. Flight 232 approached runway 22 at 200, 20 knots, 80 knots faster than normal landing speed. The descent rate was 1,850 feet per minute, more than 6 times the normal rate. Without flaps, the DC-10 couldn't slow down or reduce its sink rate. A safe landing would require 140 knots airspeed and 300 feet per minute descent. Flight 232 was coming in at 220 knots and 1,850 feet per minute. The cockpit voice recorder captured the final moments. 4:00:11 p.m. Fitch. "Left, left." 4:00:14 p.m. Haynes. "Brace, brace, brace." 4:00:16 p.m. The right wing tip struck runway 22 first. The impact tore the wing off. The aircraft cartwheeled. The tail section separated. The cockpit broke away from the fuselage. The main fuselage section rolled onto its back and skidded sideways across the runway into an adjacent cornfield. Fuel ignited immediately. Fire engulfed the wreckage. 4:00:24 p.m. The aircraft came to rest inverted in the cornfield. 8 seconds from impact to silence. Then, on the cockpit voice recorder, after 12 seconds of crackling flames, Haynes. "Anybody hurt?" Dvorak. "No." Records. "I'm okay." Fitch, groaning. I think I broke my back." All 4 men in the cockpit survived. Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Nielsen, of the Iowa Air National Guard was conducting a pre-flight inspection when he heard the explosion. He looked up, saw the fireball, started running toward the smoke column. Behind him, 285 Air National Guardsmen mobilized. Nielsen reached the wreckage first. Smoke, fire, metal, bodies. Then he heard crying, small, child. Through the smoke, a toddler sitting in the dirt, 3 years old, covered in soot, alone. Spencer Bailey. Nielsen scooped him up and ran toward the ambulances. Photographer Gary Anderson from the Sioux City Journal raised his camera. Click. That photograph would appear in Life magazine, Time, NBC. Nightly News. Spencer's mother, Francie Bailey, did not survive the crash. Spencer and his brother, Brandon, did. Of the 296 people aboard Flight 232, 112 died and 184 survived. 13 passengers walked away uninjured. The survival rate, 62%, was considered miraculous for an accident of this magnitude. Typically, crashes at high speed and high sink rates produce survival rates below 20%. The National Transportation Safety Board would later identify multiple factors that contributed to the survival rate. Daylight. The crash occurred at 4 p.m. in July. Clear skies, excellent visibility. A nighttime crash would have delayed rescue by hours. Weather. The wind was nearly calm. No crosswind, no turbulence. Visibility was 10 miles. Timing. Hospital shift changes in Sioux City occurred at 4 p.m. The crash happened precisely during the overlap, when both outgoing and incoming medical staff were present. Double the normal staffing. The Guard. The 185th Fighter Wing held its monthly drill on July 19. This happened 1 day per month. 285 trained military personnel were on site. On any other day, perhaps 30 people would have been on the base. Tehran. The aircraft crashed into a cornfield. Soft dirt. No buildings. The cornfield absorbed kinetic energy and prevented secondary explosions. These factors were not the result of superior airmanship or engineering design. They were coincidence. Captain Haynes would later say, "People say we were unlucky. I say we were lucky 184 times and unlucky 112 times." But there was one factor that couldn't be explained by weather or timing or geography. It was the decision of a 46-year-old training instructor to walk forward to the cockpit instead of staying in seat 1C. Dennis Fitch spent 3 weeks in the hospital. Broken back, fractured skull, ruptured spleen. 6 weeks after the crash, he returned to work training DC-10 pilots. He would later describe those 30 minutes kneeling on the cockpit floor as the most alive I have ever been. Fitch died on May 7th, 2012, at age 69, after a battle with brain cancer. He is survived by his wife, 3 children, 2 stepchildren, 10 grandchildren, and 184 people who walked away from a cornfield in Iowa. 3 months after the crash, a farmer named Janice Sorensen was harvesting corn near Alta, Iowa. Her combine hit something metal. She stopped, backed up, half buried in the dirt, a massive disc with twisted blades still attached. She called the sheriff. The sheriff called the NTSB. The NTSB called General Electric. General Electric had offered a $50,000 reward for the fan disc and $1,000 per blade. A GE attorney flew to Iowa, confirmed the find, and wrote the check. The disc that had killed 112 people and held an 18-year secret about nitrogen contamination was recovered from Janice Sorensen's cornfield. She used the reward money to upgrade her combine. Meanwhile, NTSB investigators were attempting to understand how Flight 232 had reached Sioux City at all. They programmed the exact conditions of Flight 232 into a DC-10 flight simulator at United's training facility in Denver. Complete hydraulic failure, phugoid oscillation, right turn tendency, descent rate. They invited United Airlines' most experienced DC-10 captains, line pilots with thousands of hours in type. The pilots were given full briefings on what happened. They knew the outcome. They knew the techniques Haynes and Fitch had used. They had studied the cockpit voice recorder transcripts. Not one pilot successfully landed the simulated aircraft. Most crashed 2 to 3 miles from the airport. Some entered inverted flight. Some never even saw the runway. A few made it close, within a mile, but couldn't arrest their descent rate and impacted short of the runway threshold. The NTSB report concluded, under the circumstances, the UAL flight crew performance was highly commendable and greatly exceeded reasonable expectations. The report continued. While some degree of control was possible, no precision could be achieved, and a landing with these conditions was stated to be a highly random event. Translation: what Haynes, Records, Dvorak, and Fitch accomplished on July 9, 1989 was statistically improbable, aerodynamically marginal, and could not be reliably taught or replicated. They did the impossible, and when aviation's best pilots tried to duplicate it in simulators, they failed. The NTSB investigation identified multiple failures. The manufacturing defect. The nitrogen contamination during the 1971 forging process created the hard alpha inclusion. After Flight 232, GE implemented a triple vacuum process, triple VR, which melted titanium 3 times under vacuum to further reduce contamination risk. The inspection failure. The fan disc had been subjected to 6 fluorescent penetrant inspections during its 18-year service life. Post-crash analysis found fluorescent dye in the crack surfaces, proving the crack was present and detectable during at least one inspection. The crack was missed due to inadequate attention to human factors in United's inspection procedures. The design flaw. All 3 hydraulic lines routed through a common 4-inch corridor in the tail below engine number 2. When the fan disc exploded, shrapnel severed all 3 lines simultaneously. After Flight 232, hydraulic fuses were installed in DC-10s to isolate damaged sections and prevent total fluid loss. But the NTSB also noted something unprecedented in aviation accident reports. Despite the total loss of flight controls, a condition that should have been completely unrecoverable, the crew's use of differential engine thrust allowed them to maintain approximate heading control and achieve a descent profile that resulted in 184 survivors. The report credited United Airlines' implementation of crew resource management training as a contributing factor in the crew's performance. CRM emphasizes that all crew members should contribute to decision-making and that captains should actively solicit input. When Dennis Fitch volunteered his assistance, Haynes immediately accepted. When Fitch suggested throttle inputs, Haynes implemented them. When records observed the aircraft's behavior, his observations were incorporated. This was CRM in action. Before Flight 232, CRM was a relatively new concept. Some airlines had adopted it, some hadn't. Some captains embraced it, some viewed it as an erosion of command authority. After Flight 232, the FAA made CRM training mandatory for all commercial flight crews. The accident also triggered industry-wide changes in titanium rotor manufacturing. The FAA established the Titanium Rotating Components Review Team. The Jet Engine Titanium Quality Committee implemented a database to track all inclusions found in titanium forgings. CF-6 engines, like the one that failed on Flight 232, powered many civilian and military aircraft. Due to concerns about similar defects, thousands of in-service fan disks were examined using ultrasound. At least 2 other Stage 1 fan disks were found with defects comparable to the crash disk. Those disks were removed from service. If the contaminated titanium billet had produced 8 fan disks in 1971, that meant at least 5 other disks with potential defects were installed in engines worldwide. The industry-wide inspection campaign likely prevented multiple similar accidents. Martha Conant was in coach. Row 26. Window seat. She survived. Years later, she told her daughter-in-law on NPR's StoryCorps. That event was like being picked up by the scruff of the neck and shaken. And God says, "This is your only life. Just be grateful that you've got these days and these hours and these wonderful people in your life." Jerry Schemmel was in coach. Row 35. Aisle seat. He survived. He pulled a baby from the wreckage. Later became the radio announcer for the Colorado Rockies. Wrote a book about the crash called Chosen to Live. Jan Brown, senior flight attendant, survived. She testified before the NTSB, emphasized the professionalism of the entire crew, advocated for improved child restraint systems on aircraft, continued flying for United until retirement. Captain Alfred Haynes recovered from his injuries and returned to flight duty. He retired from United Airlines in 1991. For the next 28 years, he gave more than 2,000 presentations about Flight 232, crew resource management, and aviation safety. He refused to accept the label hero, insisting that 184 people survived because of teamwork, training, and luck. He died on August 25, 2019, at age 87. Dennis Fitch became a safety consultant to NASA as a member of the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel. He spoke frequently about the accident. He told interviewers, "What makes you so sure you're going to make it home tonight? I was 46 years old the day I walked into that cockpit. I had the world ahead of me, and at 4 o'clock I'm trying to stay alive." The bronze statue on Sioux City's riverfront depicts Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Nielsen carrying 3-year-old Spencer Bailey from the wreckage. The statue is titled Promise of a New Day, Spencer Bailey. Grew up, graduated from Dickinson College and Columbia Journalism School, and works as an editor in New York City. 112 people died. 184 survived. The National Transportation Safety Board determined that a survivable landing was virtually impossible. Flight simulator tests proved that expert pilots couldn't replicate what Haynes, Records, Dvorak, and Fitch accomplished. But on July 19, 1989, 4 men in the cockpit of United Airlines Flight 232 did the impossible. They flew an unflyable aircraft for 44 minutes, using only engine thrust. They lined it up with a closed runway. They brought it down in daylight, in good weather, during a hospital shift change, on the 1 day per month when 285 Air National Guardsmen were on base. And 184 people walked away from a crash that shouldn't have had any survivors at all. The lesson isn't about heroism. It's about systems. Manufacturing systems that allowed a contaminated fan disk into service. Inspection systems that failed to detect a crack 6 times. Design systems that routed all hydraulic lines through a common area. Training systems that prepared crews to handle impossible scenarios through crew resource management. Flight 232 changed aviation, triple vacuum titanium processing, hydraulic fuses, mandatory CRM training, enhanced inspection protocols, industry-wide quality databases. But the people who survived Flight 232 don't think about systems. They think about a training instructor who walked forward when he could have stayed in his seat. They think about a captain who accepted help instead of insisting on command authority. They think about 44 minutes when impossible became possible. And they think about Janice Sorensen's cornfield in Iowa, where 184 people were given a second chance at life. Alfred Haynes spent 3 decades telling audiences, "We weren't heroes. We were people who did our jobs under impossible circumstances. The heroes were the firefighters and doctors and Air National Guard members and farmers and citizens of Sioux City who saved lives that day." But to the 184 survivors, Haynes was wrong. To them, the 4 men in the cockpit, the captain who kept his composure, the first officer who never stopped trying, the flight engineer who monitored systems under chaos, and the training instructor who knelt on the floor and flew with throttles, were exactly what heroes look like, not because they succeeded perfectly, but because when faced with the impossible, they refused to accept that nothing could be done. July 19, 1989, 3:16 p.m. to 4 p.m., 44 minutes. The men who flew the unflyable plane, the crew who did what simulators proved couldn't be done, and the 184 people who walked away from the cornfield in Iowa.